Hello, I'm Sensei Alex Kakio. Thank you for joining me this evening for Dharma Sunday, where we take canonical Buddhist teachings and tie them with everyday life. The title of today's talk is Daylight Savings Time, Seeing the Nature of Reality. Before we get into that, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. So today is daylight savings time, and I never remember if we're supposed to roll clocks forward or roll them back. Am I losing sleep, gaining sleep? I'm fortunate most of my clocks are connected to the internet, so they just change on their own. And the ones that don't just are wrong for half the year. That said, today being daylight savings time, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about it and also have a talk about what our relationship with time has to do with the nature of reality and how we can learn about reality by learning about time and daylight savings. So I have this article. It's from Live Science, which discusses the history of daylight savings time. So we'll start with that, and then we'll get into our Dharma talk. So let's see. This is again livescience.com. The title of the article is Daylight Savings Time 2021, When We Change Our Clocks and Why. It's by Gina Brenner. I believe that's how that's pronounced. All right, let's get into it. Daylight savings time begins again on Sunday, March 14th, when most Americans will move their clocks forward by an hour. On November 7th, 2021, daylight savings time, sometimes erroneously called daylight savings time, will end again, and we'll set our clocks back by an hour in those regions that observe DST. These fall and spring clock changes continue a long tradition started by Benjamin Franklin to conserve energy. Here's a look at when daylight savings time starts and ends during the year, its history, and why we have it now, and some myths and interesting facts about the time change. When does daylight savings time start and end? Historically, daylight savings time has begun in the summer months and ended right before winter, though the dates have changed over time as the U.S. government has passed new statutes according to the U.S. Naval Observatory, USNO. Starting in 2007, DST begins in the U.S. on the second Sunday in March when people move their clocks forward an hour at 2 a.m. local standard time. So at 2 a.m. on that day, the clocks will then read 3 a.m. local daylight time. Daylight savings time then ends on the first Sunday in November when clocks are moved back an hour at 2 a.m. local daylight time. So they will then read 1 a.m. local standard time. In 2021, DST begins on March 14th and ends on November 7th in the US, when you'll set the clock back an hour and the cycle will begin again. Daylight savings time in the US will begin again on March 13, 2022, according to timeanddate.com. Why did daylight savings time start? Benjamin Franklin takes the honor or the blame, depending on your view, of the time changes, for coming up with the idea to reset clocks in the summer months as a way to conserve energy, according to David Perrow, author of Seize the Daylight, The Curious and Contentious Story of Daylight Savings Time. Thunder's Mouth Press, 2005. By moving clocks forward, people could take advantage of the extra evening daylight rather than wasting energy on lighting. At the time, Franklin was ambassador to Paris and so wrote a witty letter to the Journal of Paris in 1784, rejoicing over his discovery that the sun provides light as soon as it rises. Even so, DST didn't officially begin until more than a century later. Germany established DST in May 1916 as a way to conserve fuel during World War I. The rest of Europe came on board shortly thereafter. In 1918, the United States adopted daylight savings time. Though President Woodrow Wilson wanted to keep daylight savings time after World War I ended, the country was mostly rural at the time and farmers objected, partly because it would mean they lost an hour of morning light. It's a myth that DST was instituted to help farmers. And so daylight savings time was abolished until the next war brought it back into vogue. At the start of World War II, on February 9, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt reestablished daylight savings time year-round, calling it wartime. After the war, free-for-all system in which U.S. states and towns were given the choice of whether or not to observe DST led to chaos. And in 1966, to tame such Wild West mayhem, Congress enacted the Uniform Time Act. That federal law meant that any state observing DST, and they didn't have to jump on the DST bandwagon, had to follow a uniform protocol throughout the state in which daylight savings time would begin on the first Sunday of April and end on the last Sunday of October. Then in 2007, the Energy Policy Act of 2005 went into effect, expanding the length of daylight savings time to the present timing. So the story goes on, but I think I'll stop there. Again, if you'd like to read the whole article yourself, it's at livescience.com. It's entitled Daylight Savings Time 2021, When We Change Our Clocks and Why, by Gina Brenner. All right. So, what does that have to do with Buddhism? Well, what it has to do with Buddhism is a lot. And essentially what it has to do with is the fact that the world as we know it is an illusion. In fact, I personally like to say in some of my talks, life is an illusion, but that doesn't stop it from being real. And to understand exactly how that works, we can look more closely at time. So, and we all learned this in, high school astronomy class, but just to reiterate, so the Earth spins on its axis and rotates around the sun. This movement creates the illusion of a 24-hour day and a 365-day year. Now, I say the illusion of a 24-hour day and a 365-day year because days and years change depending on where you are in our galaxy. On Saturn, one day is 10 hours and 42 minutes long. On Uranus, one day is 17 hours and 14 minutes long. Even the days of the week as we think of them are completely made up. The 7-day week originates from the calendar of the Babylonians, which in turn is based on the Sumerian calendar, which dates back to 21st century BC. And the 7-day week is based on the time it takes for the moon to move from one phase to the next. So half moon, full moon, crescent moon, etc. So what we're dealing with when we're talking about time is scientists doing a very good job of looking at our reality and chopping it up into pieces so that we can understand it more fully and that we can interact with it more skillfully. Because without time, it would be chaos. If we had no idea of what's a day, what's a week, what's a year, when am I supposed to get to work, we couldn't get anything done. So we chop up our reality into years, and we chop that year into 365 days, and we chop the day into 24 hours, and the 24 hours into minutes, boom, 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 boom. And that's how we live our lives. So time is an illusion, but it's very real because it's an illusion we all buy into. It's an illusion we abide by. But the way we react with that illusion of time has a very real effect on how happy or unhappy we are in our day-to-day lives. And I'll give you an example. Many years ago, when I had completed my training as a Buddhist lay minister, and I was going to my induction ceremony, I was going to my home temple in Coors Gold, California, to meet with Reverend Koyo Kubose, one of my teachers, and I was taking the train. And Reverend Koyo was very kind in that he was volunteering to pick me up from the train station and give me a ride to the temple. Now, what's interesting about this, and I didn't know this at the time, but the rule about taking Amtrak, as wonderful as it is that you never take the train if you need to be somewhere on time. Trains are always running late. They have to share the tracks with freight trains. So trains carrying coal and lumber, etc. And those freight trains always have the right of way. So let's say a freight train is going this way, Amtrak is coming this way. Amtrak has to stop until the freight train gets by. So It's not unusual for trains to arrive several hours or sometimes even a few days late. I didn't know this. So I told Reverend Koya to pick me up at a certain time, and he said, okay. And the train was running late, and it was running more late, and I was texting him on my phone, oh, I'll get there at this time. Then I text him again, actually, I'll get there at this time. And I'm getting really worked up and upset, right? Because here's my teacher who I respect very much. He's offered to do this service for me, pick me up from the train station. And now in my mind, I'm just ruining everything, being a very ungrateful student by not being able to tell him when to pick me up, right? And he's got other things he has to do. So I'm getting really upset and I'm just apologizing profusely on the phone. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize this would happen. And he just responded back, whatever time you get here is the perfect time. And the moment he said that, I just felt 1,000 times better. All the guilt, all the shame, all the fear, he's going to be mad at me, it all went away. All because Reverend Koyo had a very deeply realized understanding of time, which is that it's real. We have to abide by it, but you know what? Sometimes it's okay to relax. It's not that big a deal for running late. We should try to be on time, obviously, but you know, things happen. And that's a lesson that he taught to me, which I'm very appreciative of. And that's a good way to deal with time and life as a whole. Yeah, it's real. We have to take it seriously, but we also have to understand that sometimes things don't work out the way we want. And that's okay too. Now, in Buddhism, Buddhist scholars going back 2,600 years have done something very similar with reality that scientists have done with time. Meaning they've looked at various portions of our physical world in the same way that scientists looked at the sun and the moon, and they chopped it up into pieces. And they use those pieces to study the nature of our reality and determine how best to interact with it. This was done by people called the Abhidharmists. Now, Abhidharma can refer to several different things. First, Abhidharma is a collection of the Buddhist teachings, his discourses. There are also various schools of Abhidharma, the most famous of which is probably the Theravadan school. However, a long time ago, there was also the Sarvastivadi school, which has since died out, unfortunately. And there's also Abhidharma as it relates to reality. Again, that chopping up of the physical world into parts so that we can better understand it. Now, according to Buddhist teachings, there were originally 84,000 dharmas, which means that the Abhidharmas has chopped up our world, our minds, our reality into 84,000 parts, which students were expected to memorize and master and learn to study and work with. But 84,000 was a lot, so eventually it was trimmed down to 660, and that was still a lot. So eventually it was trimmed down to 100. And there are various books that talk about the 100 dharmas, rather, of Abhidharma. Some of them were written by a teacher named Vasubandhu. He was a Sarvastivadin Buddhist originally, and then he eventually changed to the Yogacara school, which is the Mahayana Buddhist school. And he did a very good job of bringing the teachings of Mahayana and Sarvastivadi together, or Mahayana and Abhidharma together, and showing how they could work together, our understanding of both the absolute and the conventional parts of reality. So a dharma, as we're going to talk about today, is an aspect of truth or reality. One aspect of Dharma that we're probably the most familiar with is Buddha Dharma. And Buddha Dharma is the same as other Dharmas, is that it's empty of inherent existence. It has no separate, permanently abiding self. It's an illusion, but this Buddhist illusion is very useful and very skillful. I'm obviously very adept at it, very bought into it. I assume some of you are as well. And you don't need to memorize all 100 dharmas or 660 dharmas, or definitely don't need to memorize all 84,000, but there are some that are useful to understand if we want to understand the way the world works. The first being the 8 streams of consciousness, which are taste consciousness, touch consciousness, smell consciousness, sight, hearing, and mind consciousness, so all 5 senses plus our minds. Then there is manas, which is the illusion of a separate self. This is all of our streams of consciousness coming together to create the illusion of a self. And then we have the alaya, or the storehouse consciousness. And in Buddhism, we are taught that everything arises from the storehouse consciousness. So karmic seeds are planted in the storehouse through our actions, through our speech, etc. And then those karmic seeds ripen once the conditions are right, just like planting seeds in a garden. Now, to understand how this works, the 8 streams of consciousness, we can think of a storm. So when Buddhists say there is no self, this is what they're talking about. Because if we look at a storm, what makes up a storm? Well, there's clouds, and there's rain, and there's puddles on the road, and there's lightning, and there's the sound of rain against the windows. But if we were to go up into the clouds and search around, we wouldn't find one permanent thing that is storm. If we grabbed lightning somehow, we couldn't say that the lightning was a thunderstorm, or the puddles rather, or the sound of rain against our windows. It's all of those things coming together that makes the thunderstorm. At some point, we don't know when, there's a mental transformation, and all of these things together make thunderstorm. At another point, we don't know when, it all breaks apart, and the thunderstorm is gone. And it's the same way with us. All of those streams of consciousness, taste, touch, sound, smell, etc., come together. At some point, we don't know when, Alex, boom, I'm here, I appear. And at some point in the future, I don't know when, all of those streams of consciousness will break apart, and they'll disappear. So in that way, in the same way that time is an illusion, but it's also real, we are illusions. We have no permanent, separately abiding self, and we are also real. I'm sitting here right now, I'm talking to you. You, I hope, are listening. So when we talk about form and emptiness, that's what we're talking about. The coming together and breaking apart of various dharmas, of various streams of consciousness. It's true of time, it's true of storms, it's true of us, it's true of our entire reality. Now, in addition to the 8 streams of consciousness, we also have the 5 universal mental factors. And these are dharmas that have to do specifically with the mind and how the mind processes information in our reality. We have contact, attention, sensation, perception, and volition dharmas, or universal mental factors. And the way this works is we make contact with an object through a sense organ. Let's say it's the eyes, so we see a houseplant, and then we focus our attention on the houseplant. And then there's a sensation, good, bad, or neutral, and oh, the houseplant looks good. It's well taken care of. Then there's the perception. So there's emotion and there's thoughts. So we have a good houseplant and we feel good about it. We're happy. We're going to leave it alone. It's fine. It doesn't need anything. And then there's volition. What do we do in the physical world? So why are these important? These dharmas, contact, attention, sensation, perception, volition. Because this is how karma is formed. Remember, karma, action, cause, and effect. We throw a ball up in the air, that's a cause. The action is it comes down to the, or the effect rather is it comes down to the earth. Where does karma come from? It comes from the 5 universal mental factors. So if we study our mind, if we study this cycle of the 5 universal mental factors, we figure out why we do the things we do. And then, again, chopping reality into parts, we figure out what things hurt us, what things help us. Instead of just acting on our emotions, we can see them coming from a mile away. If we realize that, oh, the things I pay attention to decide what pops up in my mind, attention being the second mental factor, we're a lot more careful about what we pay attention to. We realize that, maybe I shouldn't follow this person on Twitter because every time I read their tweets, I get angry. Maybe I shouldn't drink an energy drink right before I go to sleep because then I stay up all night. Right? Very simple, normal things, but we can't have these realizations unless we're studying our minds, unless we realize and understand what's happening. And understanding the 5 universal mental factors helps us do this. So why are the 5 universal mental factors important? Well, like I said, that's what causes us to create karma, positive karma, negative karma. And backing up, so we have manas, the illusion of a separate self. This leads to the 5 universal mental factors. The 5 universal mental factors leads to desire. Okay, because we have this illusion of a separate self, so we have 2 types of desire that pop up. We have a desire to protect ourselves. I'm here, I want to stay here. And we have a desire to control and manipulate the world around us. So let's say, just as an example, I look at the houseplant. So contact, attention, perception. Instead of a positive feeling, I get a negative one. Okay, so the houseplant is bad. I don't like it. Okay? And then that sensation turns into perception. So now I'm thinking bad houseplant. Volition, maybe I throw it out. It's a bad houseplant, get rid of it. Or maybe I'm walking down the street and I see someone coming towards me. Contact, boom, I see them, attention, I'm focusing on them, perception is negative. Now thoughts come into my head. That person's a jerk. I remember that time he cut me off in traffic a year ago. Volition pops up. Maybe I say a dirty word. Maybe I look at them and I give them a dirty look. Maybe I bump them with my shoulder as I walk by. Karma is happening. Now, if I watch my 5 universal mental factors, I can stop all that from happening, however. But let's say I don't. Well, uncontrolled, we end up with greed, anger, and ignorance. Greed, I want to keep things how they are. Anger, I want to get rid of things. Ignorance, I can't see the consequences of my actions. So if I'm not watching my 5 universal mental factors, then I'm just doing whatever comes into my head. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But if I understand the 5 universal mental factors, then I can control the narrative. In the same way that if we understand time, we can roll our clocks forward or back at the appropriate time. And if we understand time, then if we're running late and we're getting all freaked out and worried about it, our teacher can help calm us down. But we have to understand the nature of reality that is both illusory and real at the same time. Thus, we can interact with it in ways. We don't have to accept the world as it is. We can interact with it in ways that makes life better for both ourselves and other people. And we can see this if we look at the Buddhist texts, if we look at the Abhidharma. There are proof texts which say this. Vasubandhu once stated that the unconditioned dharmas exist within the conditioned dharmas, meaning the absolute is not separate from the conventional. Yes, life is an illusion, but it's also real. So knowing it's an illusion doesn't mean that we ignore the world around us. Rather, it means that we work with the world around us skillfully, chopping it into pieces, studying each piece, and figuring out what's the best thing to do. We also have models of behavior in the Dharma. If we look at the Buddha and how he lived his life after realizing enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, he continued to practice the Dharma, holding to strict moral standards, continuing to meditate, to chant, to teach the Dharma for 45 years until he died. He saw reality clearly, and he worked with that reality skillfully. If we look at the Bodhisattvas, fully realized, fully enlightened beings who then, because of their enlightenment, choose to dive deeper into reality and work for the benefit of all beings. Because if we understand that life is an illusion, then we understand that we're all in this illusion together. In the same way that if I understand my hands are a part of me, I naturally care for my hands. Bodhisattvas, realizing that all of existence is part of them, naturally work to care for all of existence. But in order to get to that point, in order to live as a bodhisattva, we first have to understand the nature of reality. And the 5 universal mental factors and the 8 streams of consciousness are useful, effective ways to do that. So I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to study the teachings of Vasubandhu and his 100 Dharmas. And I can encourage you to work for the benefit of all sentient beings, including yourself, but only after you change your clock. Amitabha.